Frank Fritz was more than just a collector. He was a man with a passion, a sharp eye for treasures, and a life filled with unexpected twists. From his rise to fame on American Pickers to his struggles behind the scenes, his journey was anything but ordinary. He battled illness, heartbreak, and personal demons, all while keeping a smile on his face for the cameras. But what really happened in his final years? Join us as we uncover how Mike Wolfe finally broke the silence on Frank Fritz and why it's bad. The journey of Frank Fritz. After Frank's death, everyone was waiting for his longtime friend from the show they ran together to speak. Although at one point they had disagreements, Mike Wolfe finally broke his silence on Frank Fritz. And it's bad. However, we cannot talk about the end of life and the legacy that Frank left without seeing what he brought to this world. Frank Fritz's journey wasn't just about collecting antiques. It was about seeing history where others saw junk. From a young age, he had an eye for the forgotten and the discarded, a skill that would eventually make him a household name. But before he ever set foot on television, before the fame and the fans, he was just a kid with a passion for collecting. Frank was born on October 11, 1963, in Davenport, Iowa, a small town with deep American roots. He wasn't like most kids his age. While others were busy with sports or video games, Frank was searching for hidden treasures. His fascination with objects started early: coins, stamps, beer cans, old razor blades. If it had a story, Frank wanted to know it. Imagine being a young boy and stepping into an old antique shop, where the air smells of aged paper and polished wood, and the ticking of grandfather clocks fills the silence. Most kids might get bored, but not Frank. He was captivated. Every item had a past, a mystery waiting to be solved. Who had held this pocket watch? What stories could an old sign tell? The past wasn't just something in history books. It was in his hands. As he got older, Frank's interest grew. His small collectibles turned into something bigger: motorcycles, dirt bikes, rare memorabilia. He spent weekends at flea markets, garage sales, and estate auctions, always on the hunt. Many people might have thought he was just a kid with an unusual hobby, but to Frank, it was something more. It was an adventure. But here's where his story takes an unexpected turn. You'd think that with his love for antiques, he would jump straight into the business. Instead, after high school, Frank took a completely different path, one that had nothing to do with collecting. For nearly 25 years, he worked as a fire inspector in Iowa. A stable job and a steady paycheck. But deep down, he never stopped being a collector. At first glance, being a fire inspector had nothing to do with collecting antiques. But in a way, it was the perfect job for someone like Frank. He spent his days visiting old buildings, firehouses, and warehouses, many of them filled with forgotten treasures. He started collecting firehouse memorabilia, helmets, extinguishers, antique fire alarms, and items that told the history of the brave men who had used them. Little by little, Frank realized that his passion wasn't just a hobby. The items he collected had value, not just sentimental but financial. What if he could turn his love for history into something bigger? What if he could do this full-time? It's not easy to walk away from a stable career, but Frank took the risk. He opened his own antique shop, Frank's Finds, specializing in fireman's equipment and other rare collectibles. It was a small step but an important one. He was no longer just a collector, he was a businessman, turning his passion into a career. Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe. Of course, Frank Fritz will always be remembered for American Pickers. The show turned him into a household name, a face recognized by fans of antiques and treasure hunting all over the country. But Frank's story wasn't just about rusty motorcycles and vintage signs. It was about friendship, passion, and, in the end, a heartbreaking fallout. At the heart of American Pickers was the dynamic between Frank and Mike Wolfe, two guys who spent over a decade traveling the back roads of America searching for hidden gems. But before the fame, before the cameras started rolling, they were just two kids from Iowa who shared a love for collecting. Their journey together was filled with laughter, success, and eventually, betrayal. So how did a friendship that seemed so strong completely fall apart? As we already mentioned, Frank Fritz was born on October 11, 1963, in Davenport, Iowa, while Mike Wolfe was born a little over a year later in Joliet, Illinois. They grew up in the same town of Iowa and first crossed paths in middle school. But were they childhood best friends? Not exactly. In fact, they didn't grow particularly close until later in life. Frank and Mike weren't inseparable buddies from the start. Their paths ran parallel, but it wasn't until their shared passion for antiques brought them together that they really formed a bond. Mike was always the big dreamer, the guy with a vision. He saw potential where others saw nothing. He didn't just want to collect antiques. He wanted to turn picking into something bigger. He had an idea: what if people could watch pickers like them in action? Frank, on the other hand, was more laid back. He loved the hunt, but he was content with running his small antique shop, Frank's Finds. He didn't have grand ambitions for fame or fortune. He simply loved finding lost treasures, chatting with collectors, and making a living doing what he enjoyed. But when Mike started pitching the idea of a reality show about picking, Frank was intrigued. It wasn't an easy sell. Frank was skeptical, but Mike was persistent. He spent years filming his own picking adventures, crafting a pitch, and knocking on the doors of different networks. Finally, after countless rejections, the History Channel took a chance on his idea. In 2010, American Pickers was born. And just like that, Frank and Mike became reality TV stars. The show was an instant hit. The formula was simple yet addictive: two best friends traveling across America, digging through barns, garages, and junkyards, searching for hidden treasures. But it wasn't just about the antiques. The real magic was in the people they met and the stories behind the objects. Mike was the smooth talker, the businessman, the deal maker. He had the energy and the vision. He was always looking at the bigger picture. Frank was the heart of the show. He had a natural way of making people feel comfortable. He cracked jokes, bonded with collectors, and turned even the most awkward moments into something fun. Fans loved him because he was real. He wasn't just putting on a show, he genuinely loved picking. For over a decade, the duo traveled the country hunting for what they called rusty gold. Their chemistry was undeniable. It was like watching two brothers bicker, joke, and work together. And while Mike often took the lead in negotiations, Frank had his own specialty: he was the motorcycle guy. If there was an old bike buried under years of dust, Frank was the one who got excited. But while everything seemed perfect on screen, behind the scenes, cracks were forming. In 2020, fans started noticing something strange: Frank was missing from episodes. At first, the explanation was vague. Then it came out that he had stepped away due to health issues. He had undergone major back surgery, leaving him with 185 stitches and 2 rods in his spine. He was also dealing with personal struggles, including a battle with addiction. At first, many assumed he would return, but months passed and there was no sign of Frank. The silence from Mike and the American Pickers team was deafening. Then in 2021, the news broke: Frank was officially out. Mike released a statement saying he would miss Frank and wished him the best. On the surface, it seemed like a professional farewell. But Frank had a very different version of the story. Frank didn't hold back in interviews. He felt betrayed. According to him, Mike never once reached out during his recovery. Imagine that, after working together for over a decade, traveling thousands of miles, and building a successful show, one of them goes through a life-altering surgery and the other doesn't even call to check in. Frank wasn't shy about calling out Mike's statement. He claimed Mike had wanted him out of the show for a long time. He insisted they were never as close as people thought, that their relationship was mostly for the cameras. It was a painful and bitter ending to what many fans had assumed was a lifelong friendship, and the audience felt it. Social media exploded with fans taking sides. Some blamed Frank's personal struggles, while others accused Mike of turning his back on his longtime partner. Fans loved Frank's enthusiasm, his humor, and his ability to make a simple pick feel like an adventure. Even after he was gone, viewers continued to ask for his return. Many held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, he and Mike would reconcile. But that moment never came. Frank's exit marked the end of an era. The show continued, but it was never quite the same. Something was missing. The dynamic that had made it special was gone. And for many fans, American Pickers without Frank just didn't feel right. A life of battles. Even though Frank was missing from American Pickers, he was never far from the hearts of his fans. They had watched him for years, traveling the country, cracking jokes, and getting excited over rusty treasures. But behind the laughter and the thrill of the hunt, Frank was fighting battles that most people never saw. Life off-screen wasn't as easy as it seemed. His struggles piled up one after another until they became too heavy to carry alone. His health, his personal life, and his mistakes all collided, creating a storm that threatened to take everything from him. But as the old saying goes, you know a friend in trouble, and in Frank's darkest hours, an old friend came back into his life: Mike Wolfe. For years, fans noticed Frank's weight changes. Some thought he was just aging. Others worried something was wrong. Then he revealed the truth: he had Crohn's disease. Crohn's is a brutal illness. It's unpredictable, painful, and has no cure. One day you feel fine, the next you can barely eat. Frank struggled with it for years, often hiding his pain behind his usual charm. He lost 65 pounds trying to manage it, but no amount of weight loss could make the disease go away. Imagine living every day not knowing when a flare-up might hit, being constantly exhausted and unable to enjoy the food you love. That was Frank's reality, but he never let it stop him. Still, Crohn's was just one of the battles he faced. Fame isn't always as glamorous as it looks. When American Pickers exploded in popularity, Frank went from being a small-town antique dealer to a TV celebrity. Strangers recognized him everywhere he went. People expected him to be the funny, easygoing guy they saw on television. But in reality, the pressure was mounting. He struggled with anxiety, and like many who suffer from it, he turned to medication. Xanax helped, but when mixed with alcohol, it became a dangerous combination. Then came the mistake that changed everything. In 2017, Frank was pulled over for driving the wrong way on an Iowa interstate. He had been drinking and had taken Xanax. He was charged with operating while intoxicated. The arrest made headlines, shocking fans who had only known him as the lovable picker from TV. It was his wake-up call. He admitted that alcohol had become a problem, and he wasn't just drinking for fun anymore, it was an escape. His mother had struggled with alcoholism. So had his grandfather. Both of them died because of it. Frank knew he was headed down the same dangerous road. So he made a decision that would change his life. Frank checked himself into a rehab center in Iowa, not for a short stay, not for a quick fix, but for 77 days. He took his recovery seriously, determined to break the cycle that had gripped his family for generations. When he came out, he was a different man. He said he didn't even like drinking anymore. He wanted to live, to be healthy, to get back to doing what he loved. But life wasn't done testing him yet. In July 2022, another tragedy struck. Frank was found unresponsive in his home after suffering a massive stroke. He was rushed to the hospital, and for weeks, no one knew if he would make it. The man who had once roamed the country in search of hidden treasures now struggled just to survive. A stroke is more than just a medical emergency, it changes everything. It can take away your ability to walk, to talk, even to think clearly. And for Frank, who had already been through so much, this was another mountain to climb. He was moved to a rehabilitation center, where doctors tried to help him regain his independence. But the damage was severe. He could no longer take care of himself. A court had to appoint a guardian to oversee his daily life, while a bank controlled his finances. The man who once lived on the road, free to chase adventure, was now dependent on others for even the smallest tasks. And then came the financial burden. His medical care cost a staggering almost $30,000 a month. That number alone showed just how much his condition had taken from him. His fans could only watch and hope that somehow, someway, he would recover. And when Frank had his stroke, something changed in his friendship with Mike. Mike reached out. He visited Frank in the hospital. He checked in on him, making sure he was being cared for. He didn't see Frank as the former co-star he had fought with, he saw him as the man he had known for most of his life. And for the first time in years, they talked. They laughed about old times, shared memories, and let go of the resentment. No more TV cameras, no more business, just two old friends finding their way back to each other. Mike later admitted that they had spoken many times before Frank's death. There was no more anger, no more grudges, just understanding, a love that turned to heartbreak. Although he had the support of his old friend again, there was one person from Frank Fritz's past who remained absent in his final years, Diane Banks' son. Their love story had all the makings of a fairy tale, but in the end, it turned into one of Frank's deepest heartbreaks. Frank and Diane had a complicated relationship. They first met when Frank was just 25 years old, and their romance lasted on and off for decades. But it wasn't until 2017 that Frank made it official. He proposed. He was ready to settle down, and he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Diane. He bought them a beautiful home in Iowa, an expensive engagement ring, and started dreaming of their future together. But love stories don't always have happy endings. In 2018, everything fell apart. According to Diane, she caught Frank in bed with another woman inside their farmhouse. The betrayal shattered their relationship. She called off the engagement, and their love story turned into a bitter public feud. But Frank had his own version of events. He claimed she had been the one who was unfaithful, secretly seeing another man behind his back for over 2 years. The accusations flew from both sides, each blaming the other for the collapse of their relationship. The pain cut deep, and Frank made sure he would never forget it. He got a tattoo that read, "Once a cheater, always a cheater," as a permanent reminder of the betrayal he felt. Could their relationship have been saved? Could they have worked through their problems? Maybe. But instead of finding a way forward, things only got worse. Just when it seemed like they had gone their separate ways, Diane hit Frank with a lawsuit in 2020. She accused him of negligence, claiming that he had been reckless with fireworks. According to her, he improperly disposed of a firework in an ashtray, which later exploded, causing severe burns on her hands and arms. She suffered third-degree burns, lost her eyelashes and eyebrows, and said that Frank refused to take her to the hospital. Instead, he allegedly told her to toughen up. The lawsuit made headlines, but just a few months later Diane dismissed the case. Still, the damage was done. Frank and Diane's love story, which had lasted for decades, had ended in lawsuits, accusations, and public bitterness. After their split, Frank sold their Iowa mansion in 2021 and moved on the best he could. Diane also moved forward with her life, announcing in 2022 that she had found love again with someone new. As far as anyone knows, Frank and Diane never spoke again before his death. Their story, once full of love and hope, had turned into a painful memory. Frank Fritz's death. Very soon after that, it became clear that Frank Fritz's fight was coming to an end. His body, already weakened by years of illness, addiction, and heartbreak, could no longer keep going. By September 2024, his condition had worsened and doctors knew there was nothing more they could do. When the call came that Frank didn't have much time left, Mike Wolfe didn't hesitate. He dropped everything and rushed to Frank's side. The past didn't matter anymore. The fights, the years of silence, the things left unsaid, none of it was important now. All that mattered was being there. Frank wasn't alone in his final moments. His mother was there. A close family friend was by his side. And Mike, his old friend and picking partner, sat beside him holding his hand. The room was quiet. No cameras, no bright lights, no television scripts, just a few people who loved Frank, waiting with him as he took his final breaths. Mike later revealed that as Frank's breathing slowed, he leaned in and whispered to him. He told him he loved him. He told him he forgave him. He told him everything was okay. After everything, the fame, the feuds, the struggles, Frank left this world not as a reality TV star, not as a celebrity, but as a man surrounded by those who cared about him. Frank's official cause of death was listed as late sequela of cerebral infarction. In simpler terms, complications from his massive stroke in 2022 had finally taken their toll. His body had been fighting for 2 years, but the damage was too great. He also suffered from aortic stenosis, a condition that restricts blood flow from the heart. For Frank, even the simplest tasks, walking, breathing, standing, had become exhausting. Every day had been a struggle, his body slowly giving up piece by piece. In the end, it wasn't one single thing that took Frank's life. It was the weight of everything. The battles he had fought for so long had finally caught up with him. When news of Frank's passing spread, fans mourned. He had been more than just a guy on television. It was real, relatable. He was the friend you'd want on a road trip, the guy who could make you laugh even in the middle of a junkyard. He had spent his life searching for lost treasures. But in the end, the greatest treasures weren't the antiques he found. It was the friendships he made, the people he connected with, and the memories he left behind. Mike Wolfe finally breaks silence. Since Mike Wolfe had been by Frank Fritz's side in his final years, it's no surprise that he knows more about his late friend than anyone else. But recently, Mike Wolfe finally broke the silence on Frank Fritz, and it's bad. In a rare and emotional interview, Mike spoke about Frank in a way that no one had before. He admitted that Frank had been a good man, but he had made one crucial mistake, one that may have cost him everything. Frank wasn't perfect, but he only ever truly messed up once, and that was with Diane, Mike said. Then came the shocking words, he killed her the moment he sold that house. Mike wasn't talking about murder in a literal sense. He meant that when Frank decided to let go of the home he had built with his former fiancée, he also let go of his chance at happiness. Instead of fighting for his relationship, instead of taking responsibility and having an honest conversation, Frank walked away. And in doing so, he lost more than just a house. He lost the one person who might have been there for him when everything started to fall apart. According to Mike, Diane had wanted more than anything to try again, to give their love another shot. But that never happened. And maybe, just maybe, if she had been there, Frank wouldn't have faced his battles alone. Maybe he would still be alive today. That was his real mistake, Mike admitted. Not his health, not his struggles, but letting her go. Do you believe in second chances in love? Can lost relationships ever truly be repaired? Let us know in the comments and subscribe to our channel for